is the editor-at-large for Tablet Magazine and the co-host of its popular podcasts, Take One Daf and Unorthodox. He's an Israeli-American journalist, author, media critic, and video game scholar, amongst many other things. And Liel, it's a pleasure to welcome you here and to thank you for accepting our invitation, because you do some very interesting and novel, cutting-edge ways of reaching out to teach Torah, interesting types of Torah to very interesting audiences. So perhaps you can share with us some of the things that you're doing and the people that you're reaching and how you got to this.
I would love nothing more. Thank you, Rabbi Draj, for this very kind introduction, and thank you all of you for this invitation. Rabotai, I sit at your feet. I am the least Acharon Sheba'am here. I lack the wisdom and the learnedness. So I would like, with your permission, to take a moment and speak briefly about my own journey. Not because I find it to be particularly worthwhile or interesting, but because I think it represents the journeys of so many of the people who the Daf Yomi podcast that I have the privilege to host, Take One, reaches, and also a population of learners who I think are very, very thirsty for much more of the Torah that each one of you teach every day. So despite having the great privilege of being the great-great-grandson of Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, I, growing up, was, shall we say, a few cheeseburgers removed from the faith of my fathers. I grew up in a totally secular home on the outskirts of Tel Aviv, and even though I've maintained and retained a fierce and unwavering belief in Hashem, I thought that it was perfectly feasible and possible, indeed desirable, to go ahead living a Jewish life, knowing little and doing even less. I thought that if you just define Judaism as somewhere between a family and a feeling, it enabled you to sort of skate and still be a member of the club in good standing, no matter what you did. And this belief sort of sustained me in my own life and in my own growth. I went on and came to New York City. I got my PhD in Columbia University, as Rabbi Drach said, teaching about video games and German philosophy, two fields of learning that have more in common than you would believe, and thought, like so many, shall we say, non-affiliated Jews of my generation, that the great good, intellectually, morally, spiritually speaking, was elsewhere. It was in the ancient Greeks. It was in the wise Germans. It was in all the books that filled the library where I spend so much of my time. Now, I won't bore you with the story of my own transition, because these stories are both convoluted and also kind of, deeply personal by nature. I will say that some of it had to do with a feeling that sadly a lot of us, I think, are feeling these days, that the world around us, particularly the academic world, which I experienced being a professor first at Columbia and then at NYU, was becoming deeply allergic to tradition, to religion, and it seemed in particular to Jewish religion and tradition. And in part, I would like to think that it was maturing and the soul yearning to return home, home to Torah, home to learning. And so I found myself at the cusp of a host of transitions. And I can't, if I'm being completely honest, really stop and explain what led me, say, to decide to keep kosher, or to put in tefillin every day, or to daven 3 times a day. Even though I've been doing these things for many years now, life occurs as it happens, not as it does in the movies, in sort of decisive transformational moments with a perfect musical score in the background, but in a series of stumblings and kind of understandings that happen much too late, only when you've been practicing it, hence the tremendous wisdom of Naaseh v'nishma, right? The understanding that only emanates from doing. But as I found myself in this world about 2 years ago, it was a Thursday morning, and I was following, like many of us, the news of the upcoming Siyum Hashas. And our producer, who I think won't mind if I describe him as a Reform Temple dropout and a very frum atheist, calls me up on that Thursday afternoon and said, dude, we make podcasts. We have the privilege of having Unorthodox, which, according to Hashem and to Apple, is the world's most popular Jewish podcast with millions and millions of listeners. Why don't we do a Daf Yomi thing? It sounds interesting. You always talk about wanting to sort of study more Talmud and be more engaged. Well, why don't we do that? And so with sort of typical kind of brashness, I said, this is a great idea. And I called my dear friend in Barcelona, Newhouse, and said, I am launching a 7.5-year project on Monday. Talk about job security. I mean, I felt pretty good about my prospects in the publication. And to her immense credit, she said, okay, go ahead. But bear in mind, there are a lot of other Daf Yomi podcasts out there. In fact, I know you listen to some. You should just kind of try and understand what would be the way that you would take, or the path that you would take, to make things different, to make things interesting, to make things approachable and relevant. And the first thing I did was go to West Side Judaica down the street from me and buy myself a copy of Masechet Brachot in the Steinsaltz translation. And I opened, and here I have to say, I did have one of those cinematic moments of being completely struck and transformed in one fell swoop, because I had experienced, of course, Gemara and Mishnah before, and I will be honest, it struck me as I read it earlier on in my life as a difficult text, as an unwelcoming text, as a text that was too interested in the sort of intricacies of sort of these inquisitions into the precise natures of words and processes, and not enough into these moving, stirring, big, soulful, emotional moments that I sought so desperately as a writer and as a person who didn't grow up with this world. And here I was opening the daf, and I finally got it. And I got it all at once. This wasn't commentary. This wasn't a book to put on the shelf side by side with other books. This was the entire world. I once heard Rabbi Steinsaltz interviewed by a secular Israeli television host, and he asked him, Rabbi Steinsaltz, you often bring up all these stories and all these examples from the many, many fields of knowledge that you're interested in and really kind of knowledgeable in, from science, from literature. Do you think there's a contradiction between the fact that you're knowledgeable and interested in all these worlds, but also teach Torah? And Rabbi Steinsaltz said, do you believe for 1 second that those two things are mutually exclusive? Torah is the world and time. Torah is science and art and poetry and every human emotion, everything that Hashem put on this earth. And it moved me so profoundly, and I finally got the beauty and the meaning of the daf. I finally got the mission of the rabbis to give us, particularly at a moment in time where things seemed so insecure, when you're sitting there and the Churban happens and religion itself is transformed and all of your ways of practices now need to change. They go ahead and they put it all in a book, and not just put it in a book for us to recite. They're not collecting for us dogmas to sort of internalize. They're giving us questions to inspire us. They're giving us arguments to participate in. They're giving us a text that you open right then and there, and you feel like you've entered into the world's greatest cocktail party with the smartest humans who are adjudicating and learning and figuring out every single aspect worth knowing about the human existence, and are teaching you how to be in the world, how to be with others, and most importantly, how to be with Hashem. And that just had this just sort of dramatic effect on me. And I thought that the greatest way to go ahead and have this conversation wasn't by delivering yet another facsimile and a far paler one of the great and wise words that I drank in every day in all these other podcasts and all these other shiurim of all the Rabbanim that I have the privilege of learning from, because I don't have that kind of learning, but rather to be very honest and share my own passions and my own journeys with, well, everyone, and say to our listeners that the world that we are introducing them to isn't some arcane collection of texts, isn't some rule-bound, leather-bound volume, which is just there to kind of only serve a very narrow niche of quote-unquote religious people, but rather that these are the treasures of their tradition. And I could hardly put it any better than Rabbi Mintz and Rabbanit Wolkenfeld put before, to sort of open the door to this incredible, fiery world. And to do this, we decided on 2 or 3 things. First of all, we decided that we're going to keep these episodes very, very short. We figured that 6 or 8 or 10 minutes a day was a very good introduction for our listeners, many of whom have never before opened a page of Talmud, have never read Gemara, and know very little about it. We wanted to give them a taste. We wanted to give them a kind of opportunity to indulge, something to accelerate them, something to start the day off asking the questions and hopefully wanting to learn more. The second thing that we decided is that we are not ever going to have any opportunity in that narrow framework to really engage in the whole magic and profound beauty of a daf. So instead of doing this, we tried to find one idea, just one nugget of insight from the text that raises some question that strikes us as dramatically and profoundly relevant to life today. And then the third principle is try to invite guests, many of them Jews, including, I'm very honored, rabbis. My own partner and teacher in this crazy journey is Rav David Bashevkin, who continues to teach me and guide me through this thicket and be our guest at least once a week, but also non-Jews who may have some kind of standing and connection. So for example, when we learned the daf in Brachot, in which Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach says the bracha and stands up to King Yanai and his wife and shows him that the true Torah scholar is never afraid of authority. We called up Enes Kanter, the NBA star, who is currently running away from Turkey's President Erdogan, who is trying to have him killed and has his parents denounce him on national TV, to talk about what inspiration he found in this section about being true to what you believe in and standing up to authority. When we talked, to give just one more example, when we read and studied Shabbat Yud Aleph, the famous paragraph about אם יהיו כל הימים דיו והאגמים קולמוסים ושמיים יריות וכל בני אדם לבלרים, אין מספיקים לכתוב חללה של רשות. I called up Congresswoman Katie Porter from California, who some of you might have seen with her whiteboard of truth on TV. And I said, Congresswoman Porter, I would like to share this insight with you about the government, the work of government authority being so infinite that even if all the seas were ink, we will never have a good record of it. And to document those encounters of those people, again, some of them non-Jews, many or not most of them Jews, with these texts and the way that their lives are transformed by this wisdom that they didn't necessarily know existed. And if they knew existed, didn't ever imagine or have the audacity to imagine that it belonged to them, that it could inspire and inform them too. Is just the kind of most magical journey, and this leads me to the 3 kind of takeaways that I wish to leave with you here. I'm happy to say that this experiment of ours has proven, we're now in year 1.8 or something like that. It is proven to be incredibly successful. We now have we've surpassed recently the 1.5 million unique downloads. Which has very little to do with any talent or skill set that we have, and I believe firmly everything to do with a grand thirst that people have for this material. I'm also privileged to recently sign a book contract with a major publisher, W.W. Norton, which put out some of my other books, for a book about the Talmud, for a kind of introduction that is meant to do the same thing. And as I think about these projects and about this great zchus that I have of sharing my own journey, I'd like to share three kind of insights that I've sort of acquired as I went along this phase. The first is that you will be surprised, delighted, and thoroughly moved by knowing how many out there in the world are so thirsty for this knowledge, and what a diverse crowd this truly is. We are now in a time that is, for better or worse, I believe, deeply transformation. A time in which anti-Semitism is rampant, a time in which competing ideological stances, and I dare say competing religious ideological stances, are rising and really calling into question commitment to traditional values. And I think a lot of people find themselves scared, find themselves insecure, find themselves uncertain of what it is that they have to do. How is it that they have to raise their children? And as they do, as they are encountered with what is popularly referred to in the press as this kind of woke, tsunami of attempts to cancel or reconsider or redefine even what were 3 minutes ago considered our most foundational ideas. I think a lot of people are returning or turning their head to the one thing that they know has always been true and will always be true. They're turning their head to Torah. And that coalition is incredibly broad. It involves or includes people who you would never think had any notion and any understanding, and they approach this subject, as I myself did, with great trepidation, because they feel the sense of embarrassment. They feel the sense of, I should know more. And they feel the sense of, well, where do I go for stuff? So my first kind of insight is that the tent is very, very wide, and it includes very many. My second insight is, in order to welcome people to this tent, I think the first step it has to be attitudinal. It has to be to basically appear and believe and model for them the kind of tremendous warmth and joy that we each get from studying Torah every day. The warmth and joy that I get being Kovea Itim and having the most rewarding transformational hour of every single one of my days being studying Gemara. That emotional openness is impossible to fake. It's impossible to replicate. And it's the most important thing I believe that you could do for a fellow Jew, is just to be there and say, hey, this is great. I don't know a lot, but we're studying together, and we'll welcome in teachers who could teach us a little bit more. And you know what? Maybe for some of these listeners, this is only the first step, and there will be no other step. There will be no other limud Torah throughout their day. But maybe a few of them will go on and pick up a book, and a few more maybe will go and be Kovea Itim themselves and study more. And as Rabbi Mintz so beautifully told us the story, how many mothers truly did it take to deliver to the world, to the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu? And the third kind of insight that is I think very deeply related to that has to do with this kind of innate sense of pride. Very often when we talk about how to approach our task, we think about it in terms of, well, we need to market these things better. We need to create more accessible platforms. We need to create these kind of things that everyone could approach. It could be very good. All these things are completely true. And this is also a great opportunity for me to share my incredible gratitude for JLI and for Sefaria, a website that I use more times a day than I could begin to tell you. We also link to it, of course, in our own show notes. It is a God send, and I'm proud to be a reader and send as many contributions to it as I humanly can. But I think there's a kind of a more foundational emotional approach here, which is this. I think it is incumbent upon us to behave, and I'm paraphrasing here, Morati Rabati, Professor Ruth Weiss, as if this is the cool kids table at the high school cafeteria. We're not out there trying to impress anyone else that, oh, we also have something good to share. We're not out there trying to kind of negotiate our way with other ideas or other groups of people that we think, you know, are some steps above us on the ladder of intelligence or desirability or insight. We're here because we are insanely proud of the zchus that we have to sit here and study and partake in this tradition that has sustained us for all these years and learn from the wisest of teachers and rabbis. And that joy is wild and it's completely infectious. And if we could only really embody that, if we could only continue to live it out, I think we would be in an amazing place. And I think the success of Take One is due almost 100% to that, to this atmosphere of we're here because this is the most interesting part. And I would like to end with a great Hasidic tale that I heard from one of my teachers who said, you know, there was a famous rabbi who came to town and said, I am now going to present a halachic question. And if you answer it, it is a very complicated one, you will be my successor. You will be the next Rosh Hashiva. And he presented the question, which was indeed a very difficult conundrum. And he said, I will be here for exactly 5 more days. So on the first day, you know, 150 Talmidim come, and they each try their hand at answering the question. None, of course, get it right. On the second day, only about 80 Talmidim come, and they're a little bit smarter, right? They're the ones who actually sat and studied and thought about it a little bit, and they all try. None of them succeed. And the next day it's 40 Talmidim, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, it's day number 5, and no one has figured out the question, the answer to the question. And the rabbi gets on his horse. He begins to ride out of town. And suddenly one Talmid runs after him and says, wait a minute. And the rabbi says, oh, you've come here to try and, you know, also answer the question? And the Talmid says, no, I came here because I'm genuinely curious to hear the answer. And the rabbi said, you are the answer. You who came here just lishma, just to study, just to be here in this thing, for no price, for no reward, for no process, for nothing. That's the spirit that we try to capture. And it is my great privilege to just be a vessel for all these other learners out there. And I'm thrilled to report that there are so many, and they will continue to grow. And as they continue to grow, they, like me, are so deeply, deeply, deeply thrilled and honored and grateful to have all of you here as our teachers.
Wow, Liel, thank you so much. For those who enjoyed your presentation, they can download you wherever they get their favorite podcasts, whether it's Spotify or any other place that's available. You have inspired us, and thank you for the work that you do and for reaching students that we would love to reach and maybe weren't able to. And we have a lot to learn from you as well, and the passion and the insight and the novelty that you bring to it. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we look forward to learning together for a long time to come.
My honor.
So thank you all for joining us. We will recoup again at 2 o'clock. We'll have the panel that will discuss the religious philosophy of Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, and we will be hearing from Dr. Erica Brown, Dr. Daniel Reinhold, and Dr. Tambra White. Thank you so much for joining us.
Shikoyach. Shikoyach.